Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Caroline Porter, and we are fortunate today to be speaking with Delia Kai. She, among other things, runs the newsletter Deez Links, which, if you don't subscribe, we highly recommend. It is roughly a daily-ish, and we can have you actually describe in your own words, Delia, but a daily-ish newsletter that takes on questions of the day, specifically, usually around media. So I was describing it earlier to someone as it felt almost sociological to me. I don't know if that's something that resonates with you, Delia, but um, in any case, we are really looking forward to speaking today. And we're going to specifically be tackling questions around how do you think about your subscriber base, the group of people with whom you're communicating, and also how you think about revenue streams or capital and what it means to augment those opportunities. So I'm going to toss it to you, Delia, in case you want to also add any nuance or subtlety to that description.
I don't think, no, that's like a really great way to describe it. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So, first question is fun. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you started Deez Links, like where the thought process was for you?
So I started Deez Links when I was in my first internship fellowship situation at Atlantic Media, and I had this job where I was basically just reading about the industry, about what was going on in media, and my job was to sort of read and boil all of those things down into um, a corporate newsletter and like memos and sort of very also like kind of very corporate decks. And it was kind of this great like post like undergrad experience because in J school at the University of Missouri I was learning about the craft and the history, and like the principles and all of that. But this was my first time like really kind of figuring out like what the New York Times is trying and what all these like new trends that are happening are, and why everyone's so excited about native advertising at the time. That was like the shiny new thing, right? And so it was like a great education, but I also sort of realized as I got more and more into media, I was like, there's so much going on in the industry that is just very funny, if not sort of worthy of being snarky about. And I would try to like insert like those little like judgments in my in my memos, and my manager was like, yeah, like this is just, this doesn't have to be that fancy. And I was just like, oh, okay. And I like got the hint. And this was like 2015, and so newsletters like Anne Friedman's Weekly and Today and Tabs were already really big and sort of getting the conversation started about how email was going to be the next big thing. And so I was like, oh well, I should start a newsletter, and then I can put all my like real thoughts about what's going on in media in there, instead of like spamming my friends' G chat windows, because they're all like, we're actually working, we're like working our real jobs. And I'm spamming them with like my takes on something, and they're like, okay, that's nice. And so it started as like a joke in a way where I was like, okay, I'm gonna like make a tiny letter and pretend that I'm like Anne Friedman, or Rusty Foster, and I'm gonna like write my takes about what's going on, and it's just gonna go out to my friends. So it'll be funny and very low stakes. But that was 5 years ago, and a lot has changed since then.
Yeah. So tell us, kind of give us a status update, where you are now. Like when you think of the newsletter, what are some of the different plates that are spinning currently?
So I as of this year, as of 2021, I decided like, okay, I'm not going to try for the daily thing anymore, because it was so much, it was just too much work. And so I'm going for like a weekly cadence with one or two Q&As with people who I think in media are doing interesting things sprinkled in. Um, each weekly, like the most regular part is that there's always going to be an email on Tuesdays, because I think for the last like 8 months have been, uh, I have a classified ad network that I'm doing with with study hall and also today in tabs, which is a weird full circle moment. But it was something that Kyle at study hall and I had been talking about for a while, and we were sort of like, everyone's like trying to make money by charging a subscription, but the fact that we like between study hall's audience and Deez Link's audience, it's like, oh, I think we can get things in front of people in media, and that's very valuable. And so what if there was like a classified ad, like a place where you could take out a classified ad and sort of make sure that whatever goes in there, a job posting or promoting a book or promoting your newsletter, and that gets seen by all these other people in media. So that's a long-winded way of saying that I do make money from my newsletter now from those classified ads, and that's kind of proved to be a path that I've found very to be in line, I think, with what I want to do with the newsletter, because obviously the cool thing now is like to charge a subscription to be on Substack, and to like have a sort of tier of paying subscribers. And it's sort of been very tempting, especially I think when you see all these big writers who are moving over there and taking their big audiences over with them. But I've liked the classified ads solution because I think it sort of speaks more. It's like a fit for the community in a way, in that like I started this newsletter as a way to like chat with my friends and like recommend cool things, and so in a way the classified ads kind of it falls in line with that without having to close off any like issues or content to people who don't want to pay another like $5 a month or whatever for it.
Yeah, that's fascinating. There are so many different avenues in there. It would be terrific to talk about. I think one thing you said really caught my attention, which is in you thinking about aligning your revenue stream with your audience. And so, if we could actually take a step back and build toward that, how do you think about your audience? Like when you think of your audience, what are whether it's like you have ideas of who these people actually are reading your newsletter, or you know what are the ways in which you can kind of make your audience real humans to you as you're
Yeah.
working.
um I guess like the way I've thought about my audience has definitely changed. I think just as I've gotten more experience in media, and the longer that I've been writing this newsletter, in that like I think at first it was a lot of just explaining things or highlighting cool things that were happening, um, to people who were not necessarily like in like capital M media. Like maybe I think like I got a lot of readers who may work in like creative fields or sort of like in marketing and everything, but they weren't necessarily going to have the time or sort of like just the opportunity to like really dig in deep on this particular drama or like why this headline is bad, or why everyone should read this long form. But I think that that's sort of changed a little bit. I think as the newsletter has grown, as I've sort of grown as a writer, and sort of just professional in media, and
Mhm.
so now it sort of feels more. I don't want to say it feels more insidery, because that just that can sound so gross and sort of inaccessible. But I think now I personally just understand more about the industry and kind of the
Mhm.
big players and the sort of like bigger stories. And so I think it's a bit more knowledgeable. So I think, yeah, I think it's a bit more knowledgeable. So I think it can appeal more to people who are really like in day to day in media, and so in that way I'm sort of, I think, less trying to explain something that happened and be funny about it, and more so trying to really spend time and figure out like what is a different thing I can say about this, because people
Mhm.
who are reading this are probably aware of this trend around newsletters or TikTok or whatever.
Yeah, totally. And so how when you think about that audience of people who are interested in the media and want to have fresh perspective on the media and what's happening, in the kind of like a turn of the dial way. How do you think too about how that relates to classifieds? Like what to kind of like break that down for me in terms of what classifieds offer?
Yeah, I mean, I maybe a good example of this was that I guess I sort of ended up accidentally testing, like doing a test of what I thought classifieds could be. So I sort of like I've kind of known about how podcasts will have advertising networks, and so it was always interesting to me where I was like, someday, like maybe that will exist for newsletters. But at the very beginning of the pandemic last year, there was like that wave where I think there were a lot of layoffs and a lot of people were losing their jobs. It was like that first, like kind of like the economic contraction was like made real.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was sort of trying to figure out like what can I do to like help people because my job was I was in a good position where I wasn't questioning like the security of my job, and I was like, well, this newsletter kind of has like an audience of people in media, and maybe some of those people will be hiring or at least know of jobs that are still out there. So I put out like a call on Twitter that was just like, hey, if you've been like laid off or if you lost work as a freelancer because of this pandemic, like just DM me and like tell me what you're looking for and like include contact info, like make it a tweet length, whatever. And I was like, and I'll just like, I was like, I'm gonna like publish like a few a day and then we'll just see how this goes. And and I got like a few hundred of those over the course of a few days. And so I was like, whoa, not only in sort of reaction to the fact that like there were so many people who really needed I think just any kind of like signal boost in a way that they could, just from the urgency of the situation, but also like I felt like people like I felt like it was a vote of confidence where people were like, yeah, like put me in your newsletter, because I think I was still kind of wrapping my mind around the fact that like people who are not my friends read it, still. And so it was sort of like, oh, I could really see my newsletter as a platform in a way that can help people find out about opportunities or cool new things or people who are looking for work or people who are hiring. Um, and so it's like, oh, okay, this response like kind of really like I guess like taught me a little bit about like seeing my newsletter as a platform more and more. And so then after kind of that wave died down, I was sort of like, well, going back to like that classifieds idea, like I could do this sort of like all the time and sort of do it to also just like help promote people's projects or whatever. So I was also getting a lot of DMs that were like, I didn't lose my job. I'm not looking for work, but could you promote this for me? And it was sort of like, I was getting enough of those where I was like, I either feel like I need this to say no to all these or find like a formalized way, I think, of being able to help people promote stuff that they want out there.
Totally. And for the folks who are watching this, I think it would be really helpful to say, okay, I'm really interested in doing classifieds too. Where do I start? What would be some initial things right out the gate that you would recommend people consider?
I would look at Anne Friedman's newsletter because that's really where I got the idea. I based everything comes from Anne Friedman, really. The way she
Fount of
has,
wisdom.
sorry,
She's the fount of wisdom.
exactly.
Wisdom.
She's like the godmother.
Yeah.
The way she has it set up on her site is just very clever in that it's very like self-service. You can just go in and pick a date and pick like the size of the ad you want, and just submit all the info and payment information there. And I was like, that's very slick. So I think the way that she has done it is sort of a very like it's like the gold standard to me. And what made me so hesitant about trying to figure it out for myself was that like I was like, I don't even know. I was like, well, do you pay taxes? Like, do you like how do you, I didn't know anything about I think just the idea of charging people money for anything. So it worked out really well that I ended up having conversations with Kyle and Study Hall where they already have sort of the infrastructure in place for processing payments, for like sending invoices, and things like that. And I was sort of like, I could spend whatever amount of time it takes to figure out how to do this myself, but you know it would, like, why not just work with study hall, because they also have an audience that really complements these links, in that it's a network of freelancers and media professionals. And so it's like, oh well, like, why not make it even cooler in that it reaches like two audiences at once. And also study hall has everything set up to where, like, they have a website, they have a little PayPal button where you can input information. It was like all of these things. I was like, oh, like, I would way rather work with them and also not have to figure this out for myself. So I think looking at like a partner, like potential partners to do it with, also just makes media in general less lonely. I think, like, working on newsletters can be so lonely because it's just you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just having a sense of like the kind of work it would take to set that up and do it legit, and like what your capacity for that is, because I was like, I can't deal with this right now. I can't read about like LLCs right now. I'm like,
Yeah.
this is the pandemic too, right? So it's just like, no thanks.
Yeah, for sure. No, know thyself, right?
Yeah.
For our viewers, could you just briefly, in case they don't know Study Hall, could you just give a brief overview of what Study Hall is and then how the two, Deez Links and Study Hall, work together?
Yeah, I mean, I was a big fan of Study Hall before working with them, so I can't say enough good things. But it's basically a listserv and a network for freelancers primarily, but also like it's really open to anybody. But it's really helpful if you're a freelancer or you're looking to get into media, and you want to be put on, like, they have this big listserv where they'll send out lists of like who's pitching, who's looking to hire, as well as a Slack channel. So it's like, if you're a freelancer, you want to kind of like have like a gossip, work kind of outlet, right? And so that's really nice because you can network with people, you can just chat with people, you can bring in questions and be like, this magazine sent me a funky invoice. Like, what do I do about it? So you can really tap into the network of people. And then I think the third part of what they do really well is just kind of compile a lot of resources for writers and editors, in terms of uh, I believe on the Google Drive there's a lot of resources that are like, here's how to pitch, here are the places that have published the rates that they'll pay. So I think it's sort of this really wonderful project in knowledge sharing that I think, especially if you're on your own, especially if you're just starting out in media, it's like invaluable. So that's my 30-second spot for study hall. And it's like I think getting the newsletters and being on the listserv is like $4 a month. So it's sort of very accessible, especially for people starting out.
That's terrific. And so do the same classifieds present on Deez Links as on Study Hall?
Yeah.
And you've just figured out how to coordinate any inquiries that come into Deez Links are then shared with Study Hall and
Yeah.
budget.
Yeah. So we have so Study Hall's site has a page that like I have the URL to, and it's basically just like a big Google form basically for people to fill out. And so like I'll link to that page in Deez Links and everything. And then like study hall and I will both see like the inbounds come in. We'll just like divide them up and follow up with people. And it's great because I think different people will reach out to study hall versus like Deez Links, and it works out really well.
That's neat. Yeah. Collaboration is key.
Yeah.
So one other arena or revenue stream that I'd love to speak with you about is your merch.
Oh yes.
Um, so talk to us a little bit about just like how you started merch and what you've learned along the way and where you're at with it.
Yeah. So I started, the idea was that I wanted to do tote bags because I was just really like obsessed with the phenomenon of like how, at least for a few years, especially when I first moved to New York, it was like very, very cool and like meant something to carry a New Yorker tote around. And then it meant like that you were kind of like out of the loop because it was no longer cool. And I just thought it was really funny because my friends and I would have constant conversations where we're like, yeah, I like, I'm already subscribed, but they released a new tote bag. And so should I cancel and resubscribe? And it was just like a whole thing.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, I feel like Deez Links as a media outlet that in no way can compete with the New Yorker. Wouldn't it be funny if we also had like a status tote bag? And so I literally I wanted to just do it for fun. That seems to be like the common through line here. I was like, I'm just gonna do it for fun. And I hired a friend from college to do the design and to make it very like that New Yorker, like it was like a spoof on like the New Yorker guy with the monocle when he's like looking at something, right? Except it's a girl looking at her phone and she's an alien.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. And so I just looked around on Etsy for like a screen printing place. And I was just like, and I found a place that was like, yeah, we'll do like, like 30 bags at this cost, just like send us this design. And so it's so funny. It's like very DIY where I just like, emailed out to Deez Links people and friends where I was like, I'm going to make tote bags, like fill out this Google form if you want one. And then I would just like wait until I had like 20 or 30 people who wanted one and then make the order and then have them mail the bags to me. And then I would like individually mail them out myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I like made a tiny bit of profit doing that. But then I was like, I don't know how to do this in a legit way. I'm going to donate it. And that's how I'm going to just step around this issue. And I did that twice. And then after a while, I was like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to like do this all the time and also like make money from it?
Mm-hmm.
And and then my friend Tanner, he like co-hosts this really big podcast, the Babysitters Club podcast, and he was like, oh, well, you should do merch, like we have merch. And so he introduced me to this company DFTBA that literally just specializes in making all kinds of merch for like creators and podcasts and everything. And I had a chat with them at the very end of 2019. And I was like, this is great. I was like, I have a newsletter. This is my audience. I just want to make tote bags and like have people be able to like go to a little page on a site and just like buy them themselves. And and it would be like legit because then, there's invoices involved and paperwork, and I'm not just like getting Venmos, right? I feel like this is all just like a lesson in me refusing to learn how to like actually have a business.
I don't know. I think it has to do with, I think there's two ways to spin that. I think it's also knowing what you're good at and what you want to spend your time and talent on. So
Right.
That's the other way to look at that.
Yeah. So I outsourced it, right? So it's like, this seems like a really great fit. And so I worked with them to like come up with designs for pins too. Cause I was like, well, we should also have pins. And I launched my shop in like January. And like immediately I get an email that's like, so all our manufacturing for like pins especially is going to be delayed because there's a virus happening in China, and that's going to delay a lot of things. And I just remember thinking like, like that's annoying. Like I just launched this shop. And, we sort of all, you can guess how the rest of the year went, where, we eventually were able to get the pins and ship things out. But I think overall, I don't think I was really prepared for the amount of work it would take to really sell merch and sort of make money off of it, because the scale is so different when I'm just asking someone on Etsy to make me 30 bags versus working with DFTBA when they're like, okay, we're going to print this is our minimum order that we have to print. And so it sort of feels like, oh, I have to sell all of these, and that was just a totally different, I think, calculus and model to it. And I still haven't quite cracked it. Like I still haven't made any royalties off of it. I'm still making up the cost to produce all of the merch. And so that all came before classifieds. And so I think that was my first like attempt to like to make money. It didn't quite go so well, but I have all these bags now if anybody wants them.
Yeah, totally. We can mention that in the slides. We'll give an
Perfect.
example. But I think something that's coming that I'm realizing as you're speaking to is just um, recognizing, having like a healthy appreciation and respect for the physicality of
Yeah.
merchandise. That, you know, there is just like a difference between hitting send on a newsletter and, you know, physically mailing items.
Yeah,
So yeah, that
absolutely.
definitely makes sense and resonates. I think an area would be really great to pivot. It's kind of related, but you know, one of the questions I have is, has you've thought about not charging for your subscription? It'd be great to hear a little bit about why that is, and also, you know, how you think about other forms of capital. So maybe not just dollar signs, but what when you think of the ways that you uh, can leverage these links, what does that look like for you? So initially talking about the dollars and then pivoting to talk about the other forms of capital.
Yeah, this is a really good question. I think especially when you see news about writers moving over and the sort of like number of paying subscribers they have right away, or the advances that they're getting with Substack, it's very, very tempting, because it's like, oh, well, if you just do like a little bit of math in terms of, I think that the figure that is sort of circulated around in newsletter circles is that, you know, 5 to 10% of your audience like will probably pay for your work. And so from there you can really like do the math and you're like, oh, I could be making this amount every month. And that's so tempting, especially every month when it's like time to pay rent, right? But I think I have always felt like that wasn't the right route for Deez links, because half the time I'm really just linking out to other people's work. Especially in the early years where I was just sort of, it was like every day I was like, here's the thing to read and here's why I think it's cool. And I was always like, that would be so weird to like charge for that, right? Like, I think part of it was sort of you know, sort of maybe devaluing my work, but part of me was also like, you know, I'm just like a year or two into my career. I'm just offering like my color commentary on this. I don't know that like people would pay money for this. And also it's sort of, yeah, it seems strange to be like, I'm gonna charge you for what I think about someone else's work. And now you should go click on their work, you know? So so that was kind of the more basic calculation around that for me. But I think also at hand was sort of seeing the newsletter as a way to accrue, I guess, like more like social or sort of like professional capital in a way, and because I started it, you know, as someone who was fresh out of college, who didn't have a lot of context, didn't have a voice, like, you know, didn't really have like more than like 5 people following them on Twitter. And I was very much like, how am I going to like really break into media if I'm not already like hot out of the gate with like a big writer job, right? And so part of it, I was like, I need this newsletter as a way to just experiment and be weird and sort of just figure out like how to write something every day and formulate an opinion. And on its own, like just from that, I think like these things has always just been worth doing, because it's definitely like shaped the way that I've grown as a writer and as like a media professional. Um, so that to me has already been like invaluable. But I think being able to be at the start of my career and sort of not limit my audience in any way in the way that like a subscription paywall might, is more important to me as someone who's still in this stage of her career where it's like, oh, I kind of would just love the biggest stage or the biggest platform I can have, and I'm not at the point yet where it's more worth it to me to make some money right now, but sort of kind of close off the reach of the newsletter in a way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it sort of speaks to also how you've been able to experiment. Like that's sort of a theme as you've been talking through,
Yeah,
initially, and so it's like and this is in part because you have a different full-time job,
yeah,
correct? Yeah.
yeah,
So that's sort of what is also playing into the dynamic at hand. And I think something that's going to be really interesting to see as, um, you know, the world of newsletters continues to proliferate is how newsletters can maybe be one slice of the pie, like maybe not the whole
yeah.
pie, but just one component to the pie of, how we earn income and make a living. So I think that's just really interesting too, because it is weighing the pros and cons. And like one thing is the experimentation that you garner when it's a free subscription, and you can take those risks.
Yeah, I had got really good advice on this from my friend Kara Kutrazula. Um, and she was basically like, your relationship with your audience is sort of always, it's always like, it's like this give and take. And she's like, you want to be in a position where you sort of give as much of yourself as you can, and then you wait until you have the one favor you really need them to do for you. But like at that point, you've kind of built up so much capital with them that when you say like, please buy my book, in a few years or whatever,
Yeah.
um, that's a different ask from sort of asking people who already paid for your newsletter or whatever to sort of be like, also, can you help me in this way? So she put it in a much more eloquent way than I did, but she was sort of like, like play the long-term game. Like this is like a relationship you're going to build with people for that will last maybe decades,
Oh, yeah.
um, and that's it. And at the end of the day, like that's so valuable, more so than like, than I think the short term. But obviously this is all speaking from a place of privilege in that I have a steady job. I'm not worried. I'm not actually worried about making rent. um, if any of those things changed, I think my thinking around this would also change,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. And it's absolutely a really critical like point to make, is how we think about subscriptions and newsletters as a commodity. Because you also mentioned that when you started this, like having like a healthy idea of the value that you bring, and that's important too. Um, but I think that there's just like lots of ways that we can presently be thinking about what we give and receive in
Yeah.
this work. So that's really neat to just like hear some of those thoughts. And I look forward to reading Deez links like in years from
Thank you.
now, decades. I think, I loved what you said about it being a relationship. That's like one of the key ideas that we are, trying to teach and better understand ourselves, is what it looks like to create these relationships,
Yeah.
and how it is that we feel connected to people. Do you have any tips, any hacks, anything that you've learned that you think is important to keep in mind when building those relationships?
um I think like there's sort of like an easy like tip or anything in that, like I always make it a habit to respond to any email I get that's like in response to the newsletter. um but I think overall, like something that I've always kind of kept in mind while like networking or meeting new people and everything is that, for the most part, like everyone's online kind of like making stuff that they really care about, and very rarely do they hear that it's appreciated. um and even it's like writers that you think would probably be getting like, nonstop like fan letters or whatever, it doesn't happen for anyone as much as I think people think it does. And so I think one of the best ways to sort of like start or build relationships with people is to even just, especially through like cold emailing or whatever, is to just sort of be like very earnest and sort of be like, and make them feel seen in your appreciation of their work. Because at the end of the day, I think we're all, especially now, we're all just like sitting behind our laptops, like putting pieces of ourselves out into the void and sort of wondering like, if any of it matters. So I feel like that has kind of been where a lot of my relationships, both with readers, both with people that I've interviewed, and also even with people on comms teams. Like I've kind of like, my friends are sort of like, how did you get like this person? And it's like literally like, it's always a comms person who makes it happen. And I think just sort of being able to like to form relationships with them, like the opportunity to form relationships with them has been very helpful. And sort of, I think, yeah, so I think that has kind of been my general ethos in media. And I think it might really come from the fact that like I started out like, as this like random like corporate intern, and then I worked on the marketing team. And, then I now I work on audience development. It's sort of these roles that like don't really get all the glamour in some ways, but has given me a really good view of all the work it really takes, like kind of behind the scenes. So I think coming from that perspective and sort of being able to be like, hey, like I get like how things probably are going for you or whatever. It's sort of like, I don't want to say like it's the quickest way to build a relationship, because that sounds so like hacky, but I think that's like all people really ever want to hear, right? It's just like, hey, I see what you're doing and it's cool,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
go from there.
Yeah, totally. That makes so much sense. And just in case any viewers are curious, when you say comms team, do you mean the communications team for like a media organization? Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah.
Terrific. Okay, so with the little bit of time we have left, the inevitable question: what did we not ask or talk about, but we should have? Or is there anything else you would want to mention on these subjects?
Oh, yes. Something that I always like tell, especially students, is that you should have a newsletter, even if you don't really know, um, even if you don't think you're gonna like do it full time or write stuff for it. But like when I was in J school, they told us like you should all have a website so that when people Google you, they can find you and like maybe see some of the work you've done. But now I think the thing to do is like I think a website is still useful, but I think you should have a newsletter. And every quarter, especially as a student or as someone early in their careers, you should just be like publishing like a quarterly like shareholders report where you're just like, here's what I've written, even if it's like for school or whatever. Here's what I'm interested in. And especially when it comes time looking for jobs, to just be very specific and be like, here's what I'm looking for. Because people don't really, like, everyone has like a very short memory, right? But I saw this play out in looking for jobs, over and over, where it was like when I was in the application process, the hiring manager, or whatever, would Google me, find my newsletter, subscribe. And then because I was a daily newsletter, they were getting daily reminders from me that was like, hey, I exist. And I didn't ever have to send up like, that like follow-up email that was like, remember me, because it's like, oh, I'm in your inbox. So I sort of like tell everyone that, where I'm like, even if you don't want to like be a full-time Substacker, you should have a newsletter so that like people who are really interested in you and in your and in especially like your next steps, have a direct line to you that just appears in their inbox, even if it's once every few months.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been a really fun conversation and also very enlightening. And I can't wait to see what happens next in merch. I'm putting it out there. I could go for a sweater.
Oh yeah, yeah. I want a sweater
Sweater.
too.
um, but thank you so much for your time. This has been really informative and really fun.
Thank you for having me.